Welcome to World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph and GP of Flex Capital. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Neil Strauss. Neil is the author of 10 New York Times bestselling books, including The Game, Penetrating the Secret Society of Pickup Artists, and The Truth, an Uncomfortable Book About Relationships. He's also a journalist whose work has appeared in New York Times, Rolling Stone, and Esquire. Neil, welcome to World of DaaS.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. Now, you've kind of popularized the idea of charisma as kind of a learned skill as opposed to a magical talent that some people have. From your perspective, how much of social skills are learnable versus being more innate?
I mean, the simple answer is I think everything's learnable, and it just depends on how much learning you have to do to get there. So if it comes to charisma, some people are at a greater deficit than others, let's just say with inborn charisma. But I do think, and I guess I'm somewhat of an example of it, that you can learn it and you really can figure it out if you're willing to put in the time and the awkwardness to do so.
And there's some folks famously like Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork, who just kind of ooze charisma. Is there a point where someone could have too much charisma? Is there some sort of Laffer curve where too little is not good, but too much is not good either?
In the days of The Game, back when I was doing that, which was a long time ago, there were people who were I was too good. I was overqualified. And I think there's no such thing. If you're overdoing it, you're not doing it right. So if somebody's coming on with too much charisma and you're uncomfortable, then that's not actually charisma. That's just the reverse side of the other awkwardness.
Okay, got it. Because they're just too over the top or something.
Right. And maybe they get their way because you feel so bowled over by their personality, but you leave that interaction feeling uncomfortable with any ground you've ceded or any deal you've made. So it's really not a sustainable form of persuasiveness.
Okay, got it. Is there some sort of way of quantifying what makes people interesting?
I think you can think about it in terms of other terms of what makes people interesting. I really think listening is first. It would think that people want to be interesting, and so they just talk a lot and tell interesting stories. But I mean, if someone is telling the most interesting stories back to back, at some point you're just over this person and they're the most try-hard person ever. So I think the quality of being interesting is probably listening and being interested.
Asking good questions.
Yeah, asking good questions, but also giving with the vulnerability. So just like the storytellers who storytell nonstop, they're people who ask good questions, but they give nothing of themselves in terms of vulnerability. And then someone might answer the question, but they're not really opening up and they're not really getting the answers. So I feel maybe to go back to charisma is recognizing the balance. And I'm just thinking out loud, but I'm going to say it as if it's confident. But recognizing the balance of the room and seeing what you need to keep it in balance, make sure everybody feels heard and seen. So, for example, there's some rooms that have a real vacuum of interestingness. Maybe they need you to come in, introduce people, help people feel comfortable, help bring people out of their shell. Everyone's having a great time. Maybe there's just one person over there who's not feeling heard or seen that needs a little care and attention. So to go back to your original thought on charisma, maybe charisma is actually a group energy versus one person's personality trait.
You kind of know it when you see it. You kind of feel the energy, but it's kind of hard to quantify. And then you can even say okay, someone's interesting to some person, but they're not interesting to another. So it's not good looking necessarily, where it might be easier to just say they're an 8 out of 10 or something.
And sometimes when someone's really sparking, my first thought is, well, I wonder what their personality disorder is. And what I mean by that, it's really true. Sometimes people overcompensate for lack inside by really pushing out that energy. It's such a subtlety in terms of energy. Is somebody giving energy or taking energy? Are they really trying to connect, or are they looking for validation that comes from a need of theirs? So it's all very subtle, that energy we put out. And there's a great book by Dan Siegel on parenting called Parenting from the Inside Out. And it relates to this in the sense that his whole philosophy is that to do a great parent, you need to do your own inner work on yourself. And if you're healed, then you're going to have healthy kids.
That's probably true for being a spouse as well, right? For being in a relationship.
Exactly. For being in a relationship. And I think it's true for being in social relationships.
How much do you think somebody changes, let's say, every 10 years or so?
It's funny. I just literally posted this thought on Instagram, and I think it's true that the answer is it totally depends on the person. And I think even their own assessment of themselves. I hear so many people say, I've changed in these ways, and you think you're still really the same person, but I love that you're doing the work. I'll give you an example in terms of a story. The answer is it's totally case dependent. And obviously we change in a lot of ways, but we're talking about those deeper levels of change. I know a lot of people who are getting in toxic relationships. So they say, I'm going to take a break from relationships because I don't want to date, let's say, a narcissist again. So they don't date, they don't sleep with anyone for 1 year, 2 years. Then they feel like they're ready to get out there. And what happens? They just start dating a narcissist again. So no amount of time is going to keep someone from not repeating their pattern. However, they take those 2 years and say, there's something here in my programming that is attracting me to these types of people. And I want to go find out what it is. So they maybe go do a deep, intensive workshop like the Hoffman process or the survivors named after you, I guess, and the survivors program at the Meadows, or any of a number of really intensive programs. They realize, oh, shoot, you know what? I'm dating narcissists because my father or my mother was a narcissist, and I'm trying to heal myself by making them not be narcissists. And then they have the awareness. Still not enough. Then they just say, I'm going to treat this almost like an illness inside, like a illness, and I'm going to try to take every kind of treatment there is to just reduce this, to change this patterning. And then if they do the work, they'll attract a different kind of partner. So the answer is, are people different every 10 years? It depends on how much work they do and the depth and quality of that work.
Well, there's kind of the intentional change, which I think you're going through. Like, I want to change in these ways and doing the work to get better. But there's also just unintentional change. Like, do you think people just change quite a bit every decade and they're actually different people? Or do you think that without the intentional change, they're not going to change? And with the unintentional change, it could change in a positive or negative or just kind of in a different way. Someone go from being an extrovert to an introvert or those types of things.
I think from age 3 to 13, you probably change a lot. But I mean, I do think that there's general changes in our hormonal balances and our physiology. I think a lot of changes happen in the body. And here's the other thing. Everything's one system. We like to break things down into like our psychology, our physical, our spirituality, and it makes it easy to understand, but it's all one system. So these other changes we may be making, such as now we're working out where we weren't before, now we're eating healthier where we weren't before. All these changes affect us. So the answer is there are probably a number of ways in which people change by 10 years if something else is changing. I don't think they just automatically do it, but there are obviously physiological changes. My dad from 70 to 80 was a different person. We see our parents when they get older. Sometimes that anger mellows out, and sometimes their prefrontal cortex erodes a bit and they become angrier.
What kind of relationship should we have to our past self? Because it's kind of us, but it kind of isn't us. In some ways, like I think maybe myself 2 years ago, maybe that's like my brother, myself 10 years ago, that's like my cousin or something.
Let me think about the question. So what kind of relationship should we have to our past self, being our past adult self or our past like child and teenage self, or all of it?
Let's say our past adult self.
I think our goal is to be the parents to ourselves that we never had, meaning that we want all of us have some form of imperfect parents, because all human beings are imperfect. So I feel okay about making that generalization. And the people who say my parents were perfect and my childhood was perfect, by the way, are the ones who usually have the biggest trauma. So, because it's so big, they have to really put up a wall of denial around it. And that pisses someone off. That means there's something to look at. It's like when you call an alcoholic and they haven't admitted it yet, they get very, very upset. And that's how you know they're an alcoholic. So the point being is that we want to treat our past selves in the way that we wanted to be treated growing up, which is esteeming and loving and compassionate and having trust. So I guess a relationship with our past self really would be like being the best parent you can to the person who's 10 years younger, or the best older brother or older sister or what have you.
In some ways, though, like if I think of myself in the past, like I don't agree with that person. They may have held these certain views and now I disagree with them. And I know that's kind of me, but it isn't me. Like if you're disagreeing with yourself always from like a day ago, that can be a very, very odd behavior. But if you're not disagreeing with yourself from a decade ago, well, that might be you're just not growing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great. I really want to look on my past books and disagree with every one of them because it means I'm growing and changing. If I really feel like that was my best work or that was totally right, I feel like I haven't grown. So I do think it's good to look yourself 10 years ago and feel some sort of growth or some sort of improvement or some idea that you're doing things better. And maybe it is something to look at if you feel like, oh, I was so much better 10 years ago, or I really understood that better 10 years ago. Yeah, looking at it, a shadow of who you are now is not bad.
Part of what your books are often about, like finding a life partner and growing with a life partner, like what do you think the most important traits are to look for in a life partner?
People always have this laundry list or shopping list of the traits they want. It's funny. I guess this is the theme of the conversation. But man, I hear so many people with the list of what they want in a partner, and I look at them and I'm like, do you have those things yourself? And in all my reading on psychology and all my experience, I truly believe that we meet people who are at our level of emotional maturity. Sometimes it's a flip side, but it's the same thing. And so if we want to attract better partners, we would want to embody those qualities within. Like I've found that as I've grown in terms of my maturity and in terms of what I'll call non-reactivity, not getting upset or reacting or bent out of shape if some button gets pushed or something doesn't go in the way it's supposed to go. And so as I've worked on my emotional maturity and emotional intelligence and my empathy and my understanding of people and my not taking things personally or making them about me and my conflict, I don't want to say avoidance, but conflict de-escalation when I see that somebody's getting upset, me not getting upset also and adding to the heat. As I've done all those things, I've really attracted like a higher level of partner without having to make a list. So the answer is all the things you're looking for. If you work on them in yourself, you will actually attract them because those are the kinds of people who are going to be attracted to you. And you can always see your level of emotional maturity and where you're at by the person you're dating. And when someone's complaining about how immature and stupid their partner is, all I think is, well, you're dating them. So what does that make you?
Yeah, it's interesting. In popular culture, if you think of like the more popular TV shows like Succession or Game of Thrones or something like that, it seems like all the relationships there are incredibly toxic and terrible. Are we learning something odd from popular culture?
I think that we learn worse from the way the culture shows positive relationships.
Okay, interesting.
When we're seeing the toxic negative relationships, we know that's bad. But when we see somebody saying, you complete me, or popular songs that are like, I would die without you, and all those kinds of songs, like obviously, and it's been said before and become more popular now, but those are all these codependent relationships. Our cultural idea of romantic love is really this codependence of, I don't exist without you. I can't survive without you. My whole world is you. You are my world. Like all of that is so unhealthy for a relationship and too much pressure to put on a human being and so much abandonment of yourself. So like a healthy relationship is, I am a whole individual. You are a whole and complete individual. And together we make this wonderful third entity that is the relationship.
We're a great team.
Yeah. So I think that the darker side is showing these romanticized Hollywood relationships and thinking that's what we're supposed to have. And if we don't have that, that's not love.
Do you think EQ is more important today or less important?
I'm just curious what would make it sort of less important because maybe there's a dialogue.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say at some point it might reach peak and maybe you should work on other things or something. And if you think in society today, let's say Bill Clinton or George W. Bush famously had extremely high EQ when they met someone really felt like they were part of the room. And then you go to like 2016 and the two major presidential candidates have much lower EQ, at least when they're dealing with individuals and stuff. Even Barack Obama is known as having lower EQ as well. So we could be just moving in a society where at least we don't prize EQ as much with our leaders and maybe even with other folks. Maybe there's other traits that we're prizing over EQ.
It's funny. I never thought of Obama as like low EQ. I guess I always saw him as high in EQ and social intelligence and things like that, and the way he navigated situations very, very deftly. But I guess the answer is like the qualities that it takes to be a president are probably not the best, most humane, evolved qualities. Because, I mean, there has to be a certain level of competitiveness, narcissism, sociopathy. If you read the book, Robert O'Hare, Snakes in Suits, do you know that book?
No, I've never heard of it.
So I think it's Robert O'Hare, Robert Hare. I'm sure I'm saying his name wrong. But anyway, he really was one of the biggest researchers studying sociopathy.
And what is sociopathy? And I'm not familiar with that term.
Oh, just like psychopaths.
A psychopath. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And it is Robert Hare, not Robert O'Hare. And he came up with the psychopath checklist, like a lack of conscience, lack of empathy, ego. So just think about these. Like, we probably need a lack of guilt or conscience to like run for public office because you're really trying to assassinate and destroy your enemies. You need a certain kind of egocentricity to think you're going to be president. Shallow emotions is one of the things. So a psychopath has lower emotional intelligence, obviously.
Or you could say they have a higher, I think often they rate very high on EQ, at least when they take the tests, they know what to do. Whereas somebody with like more Asperger's, which would be very low on being a psychopath, they would rate very low on EQ.
I think it depends. They did studies on psychopaths, and actually, like, it's interesting. If you meet a psychopath, you might think that they're very well calibrated socially and emotionally and things like that. But on dating sites, when people were corresponding with them via text, people could see through them much quicker. So it's interesting. They're able to dissemble better in person.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting, right?
You should just text always with people.
It's just to make sure. But his point being is that the people who rise to the top of politics and corporations tend to just be non-murderous psychopaths, meaning it takes a certain lack of empathy and egocentricity and shallow affect and lack of guilt to get to the top. So I'm not sure if presidents are the best barometer of the need for emotional intelligence. I would have no interest in politics. I assume you don't, Auren?
No.
No, right? We know politicians, but we have zero interest because we have emotional intelligence and we know that we don't want to put ourselves through that.
I don't think I have much emotional intelligence either, but I don't have much interest in politics.
Yeah. And I wonder, are we thinking of emotional intelligence correctly? In other words, I think emotional intelligence is not just understanding the emotions. I think it's also the expression of them. And it's also having empathy and things like that. So some people can dissemble that they have emotional intelligence, and also not to mistake, say, emotional intelligence for social intelligence.
I guess the question is there a point of having too much empathy?
It's interesting. You have a lot of questions about too much, which is interesting. Too much charisma, too much empathy. So I wonder, can I ask you where that comes from? And then I'll answer that question.
Well, I guess there's like, obviously having too little empathy is not good, but there could be a point where you have too much empathy, where you're constantly empathizing with people's situations. And that could also be pretty destructive as well. Like there's some sort of like a Laffer curve of all these things.
Yeah. Not to psychoanalyze you, but do you ever worry about having too much of stuff? Oh, if I go too far with this, I'm going to be not go over the edge with it for yourself?
Well, I certainly see people that I think sometimes could potentially even dial back the empathy. Obviously, I see people more common that could dial up the empathy, but I think there's plenty of people I think that have too much and where it can kind of get in the way of doing the right thing for their family or doing the right thing for themselves.
Well, the answer is empathy without boundaries is the problem. Not too much empathy. So empathy is, I'm really feeling what you're feeling. I really understand what you're feeling. I'm sharing them. I'm resonating with your feelings. But empathy without boundaries is, now I'm completely out of control with them as well.
Yep. You have to give your kidney to everybody kind of thing.
Yeah. Or I'll give you a super simple example. We're in a relationship. I come home or you come home and you have a ton of anxiety about work, and you come in with a ton of anxiety, and I'm just going about my day. And then all of a sudden you come with all that anxiety, and now I'm getting anxiety from you talking about your anxiety, and I'm not there to hold and be present for anxiety. And now next thing you know, you're trying to calm me down. You came back from work with anxiety, and now I have so much anxiety, you're taking care of me, and that can erode the relationship. So that's empathy without boundaries, because I'm just feeling what you're feeling like a child. And so empathy with boundaries is you come back and I can really be present for you in your anxiety and be like, that sounds incredibly difficult to have to deal with all those things you're dealing with. Your podcast guest was a half an hour late and wouldn't go on video, and what a nightmare that is for you. That you've been trying to schedule this thing for months, and this mic's too quiet. I know that was difficult, and you didn't value your time, and I felt like you didn't feel respected. I get that. So you can never have too much empathy with boundaries.
How open do you think we are to people transforming themselves? How open are we to other people changing?
I guess as individuals or a culture, because a culture has different personalities than an individual.
Yeah, let's say both.
The simple answer is we're open to whatever supports the narrative we want to believe. Meaning that if we want to vilify this person and they said something 40 years ago, well, they haven't changed. They're a monster, and everything else since then is a complete act. But if we want to support this person, then wow, look at how much they've changed, what growth they've had. I think we don't realize as sort of a culture, even as individuals, and especially when we're demanding facts and things like that, we already hold the belief we want to have. And then we look for the facts and the evidence that's going to justify them.
Okay, got it. Do you think transformation, like people's transformation, is harder now that people have these like social media feeds?
In the sense that the social media feeds kind of anchor them to the person they used to be or something,
Yeah, exactly.
or they have a brand.
Could be both.
Yeah. I know somebody who's a big vegan advocate and changed their mind around veganism. And again, I'm being neutral on whatever the science says, but for them, they changed their diet, but their whole platform was built on like espousing a certain kind of diet that they no longer did or believed in themselves. And they kept promoting that instead of pivoting with it. So I think it does make it harder to change. However, having the courage to realize that you having the integrity to change along the way, even if it's the opposite of what you said a few years ago, that's a kind of strength and respect.
Have you read the Paul Graham essay, Keep Your Identity Small?
No, but I like that idea. Tell me.
So yeah, it's exactly that. He's really saying it's very hard to disagree with yourself. So if you can keep your identity relatively small, it's easier to kind of pivot and make changes. The bigger your identity, it's kind of hard to disagree for something you stood for, especially if you stood like against the tide on something and then change your mind. It's harder to implement that.
Yeah, it's funny in politics, like, and this was kind of true of the pre 2016 type of elections, but flip flopping was such a bad thing for a politician. Like, I forget what politician was, but to me, like, I respect flip flopping so much. Like, I respect somebody who has a point on an issue and in the face of new evidence is willing to change their minds on it. I think it's really hard to do.
It's the classic John Maynard Keynes line.
Yeah. And you know, the Cialdini principle of consistency?
Yes, where you're more likely to just keep going on something once you commit.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like how to take advantage of people, essentially, the Cialdini world.
Right. So once you state your opinion and your thought on something, you're unlikely to change it, even in the face of contrary evidence. So I really respect people who can change their opinion in the face of contrary evidence. And does the world believe them? Or does the world not believe them? It depends on what the world wants to believe. You know, like, do we want to like them or do we want to not like them?
You've been involved in media for a long time. How's the media changed since you become a journalist?
I mean, the answer is like, there's no way I would ever be a journalist now.
Why?
Because, first of all, like, my journalism was I wrote about music and culture at the New York Times. And it was so exciting because if I didn't write about that one band, nobody would know about that band. If I didn't write about that concert would not be documented. So I felt like there's a real need for that. But nowadays, you don't need a journalist to review. You don't need me as the journalist. I do understand there's a point for the cultural criticism and for that dialogue. I do understand there's a point for that. But I really feel like when I'm contributing to the culture, I want to put something into the culture that wouldn't exist otherwise. Otherwise, to me, there's no point for me. So the answer is, and we'll spread it away from music and culture, but anyone can hear the album right away on Spotify. So they don't need the journalist to tell you what that new album is like and whether you should get it or not. Every concert you can see on YouTube, so you don't need someone to be there as your proxy. Even for the interviews I did for Rolling Stone, like, those artists, they have social media now. It's a more filtered communication than it is through a journalist, but they're on social media now, so you can get their thoughts and you can find out why they recorded the album and what their deepest thoughts were. So I feel like there's less of a purpose to it. Like a Rolling Stone cover story at that time was huge. That was that artist's way to share who they were with their audience. And now it's just sort of like a little ego thing. Oh, I got the cover of Rolling Stone. And separating from cultural journalism, it's just what's going to have the most impact. And does journalism have the most impact? I feel like most journalism is fodder for Twitter. And then Twitter is how people make their opinions. By and large, obviously, a lot of amazing people still read the newspapers. I think with AI, this is going to become even more so because it's going to change these things around. But in this moment, it just seems like there's a big journalistic article, then Twitter has its way with it, and then opinions are formed in the nexus between those two.
How do you think AI is going to affect creative work?
Let's see, I'll start with our topic, which is one great thing about AI is that now that you can fake conversations, pictures, videos so convincingly, it's going to give us what we've been wanting for the last 8 years, which is people doubting what they see on social media. Because if you see a photo that shocks you, your first thought now is this real? Was this mid-journey? So I think it's going to create a more skeptical population, which will have to do their research, which is, I think, is a great thing. You're really going to have to be in a really, really small silo to believe that's like whatever politician with whatever evil character of the day is there, shaking hands and giving them a bag of cash. Like you're really going to be in a really small silo to buy that versus this warring truth. And then as far as creativity goes, right now we're doing a podcast and like TV was supposed to kill the radio. So this format was supposed to have been dead 100 years ago. So I just think that there's just competing formats. I definitely think that a lot of the work is going to be cut out by AI in the same way that video editing got rid of cut and splice. We'd have to literally put the film into a splicing sort of bay, take an actual razor blade, cut it in half, and then take that little splicing tape and make sure you spliced it together really carefully for each cut, So obviously it's going to create a lot of shortcuts, democratize things a lot, and make a massive shift in the creative job market. And maybe there'll be competitions for, do we like AI artists or do we like human artists, and so on. If we're just talking about, say, art and creativity, it's an incredible tool set. And at one point will also be an incredible alternative to what we have now.
Because certainly we'll see much more art and much more creativity in the future. We're already seeing more. It's easier and easier to create. So you're seeing more and more creations, and you should expect that to go up pretty dramatically. And then for someone who is an amazing artist or amazingly creative, just the number of things that they could create, whether it's a book or a song or a movie or a photo or a painting, would probably go up as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you do that great children's book, and maybe you can now illustrate it yourself with the exact parameters you want using Midjourney or what have you, instead of having to hire different illustrators off Fiverr. Or maybe you want that. Maybe you want a real like pen and ink style and you want somebody who really has that skill set. But for sure, it's going to allow us to be a little more self-sufficient with our creativity.
It seems like there'll be certain people, more different winners and losers. It seems, at least to me, if you think of like in the movie or TV, it seems like the writers are more likely to be the winners, and maybe certain people in the cinematography or certain types of actors that aren't well known are more likely to be the losers. Would you agree or disagree?
I think the answer is it's hard to predict, but it does seem like the one thing AI lacks is like lived experience that kind of informs the writing, whereas special effects and things like that will now be much easier, smaller teams. For sure, it's going to change a lot, the job market of those things massively. But I think it's a lot of the time consuming things. Even with the writing, you can generate a really bad first draft right away now on ChatGPT or something. It's hard to look at a blank page. So for a writer to say, hey, write me a article on this, and now have a bad first draft to then make into their own writing is going to be great. And of course, there are ways to upload prompts of all the writers you like and to generate something in that style. So it's exciting. And of course, like the thing about AI is, as far as I know, it's the first tool we've created that has the potential to leave the toolbox. And that's the big question and the big unknown.
You're writing a book right now from the perspective of the valet at the Bored Ape Yacht Club. What is the process of writing a book like that?
It's already written and done, but I'll tell you the story of it, which was interesting, is at the beginning of like the NFT boom, let's say, I was reached out. I think an agent at CAA was working with the people who had a Bored Ape NFT thing, right? But what excited me about it actually was the idea was there's a community of Bored Ape holders who've licensed their Bored Apes to be part of this book, and you want to write a book in collaboration with them. And I like the idea of sort of democratizing the work and writing in collaboration with the sort of IP holders. So to me, it was a really fun idea of saying they designed their characters for their apes. They made a lot of choices for the book. And then I followed through on what they said. So I loved the idea of writing in community was really exciting for me.
And a few years ago, like NFTs kind of had a moment where everyone was talking about it. And now it seems maybe less of a moment. Like, how do you think that evolvement is going to happen over time?
Yeah, I find that watching really closely what happened with, say, crypto and NFTs over this sort of cycle is a fascinating experiment in culture and greed. And I really think that, and just how money corrupts. There was a lot of utopianism at the beginning of this. There's really a lot of utopianism in terms of leveling the playing field and everybody having access to these things. And the fact that you could onboard in the crypto community without an investment, but I could just take a number of steps and get paid in crypto, or write on this social media site and get paid in crypto and enter the asset class through creative work instead of an investment was really exciting. And the idea that it's trustless and all the other stuff that people have talked about was really exciting. But what happened was, what we so often see with human nature is playing field was leveled for a moment, and then a new wealthy class is created and comes in, and they get the power and they try to hold on to it. And then whatever opportunities there are for scams happen. And you just saw maybe what was a utopian vision kind of crumble in the face of greed. I'll give you a quick example, which I think says the whole. I have a friend, I won't mention his name, but I have a friend who is in this, and he put, I'm going to say $7,000 into a coin called Pepe recently. Okay. And his $7,000 turned into $600,000 in 2 weeks. And I said to him, hey, man, you've had a hard year. Why don't you at least take like $250,000 off the table? That's going to change your life. And in such a great way, just $250,000. Like, he's like, no, man, I think this could be really big. I think this could get really, really big. I think it could be the next Dogecoin or Shiba or whatever. And he held on to it. And now that $600,000 is back to still good $150,000. But he's still not going to take the $150,000 off the table because, man, at one point it was $600,000 and I'm waiting for it to go back up.
Oh, right, right.
So we have this mess, and this is like a good person who's not scamming other people, but we have this idea, like, literally, dude, you just made over $500,000 and you're holding off to get billions. Like, take the $500,000 off the table and be fucking happy. But as human beings, we cannot be happy with anything. I was just in Greenland. I don't know why, but I saw this package in the grocery store. I was looking for healthy food, and it was mango flavored apples, mango flavored dried apples. But I'm like, can't we just be fucking happy with an apple? Do I have to make an apple flavor like a mango? Like, as human beings, we're not satisfied with anything. Like, this guy is not satisfied with making $600,000 off a $7,000 investment and is holding for Bill Gates money or something.
How much of like art and collectibles is really just a scam? Like, most of the people involved are doing it because these are assets that they think are going to go up, whether it's baseball cards or you just go through the list rather than just like, obviously you could buy a print of a Picasso that's indistinguishable from the painting for 1/1000th of the actual price of a Picasso, but people don't tend to do that as much.
I mean, the answer is the exact same thing we're saying about people's reputations and whether they can change, meaning that everything is based on a made-up decision by human beings. So we're making up that a Picasso is worth a lot of money, but a Henry Darger, I don't know, I'm just saying maybe it's worth a ton, but this other artist is not worth a lot of money.
But we're also saying the actual original is worth a lot, whereas the exact same thing, but it's indistinguishable from the original, is worth almost zero.
Yeah, and that like 99.99% of the population wouldn't even be able to tell the difference between the lithograph and the actual piece and a print.
Certainly I wouldn't.
So the answer is like, it's all made up, whether it's art or money or crypto or reputations.
Jewelry or something. Yeah, I can't tell the difference between a diamond and a fake diamond.
Yeah, and they're prettier stones or like pyrite and gold or whatever it is. It's all like made up human stuff. And sure, there's scarcity and all these other things, but like literally I was thinking of writing a book called It's All Made Up that really looks at the idea that it's literally all made up. And these things that we live and die and suffer for, most of them are all made up. Same with like country, nationality. It's all how much of our lives we're living out of just made up shit. Like your social media followings, like a lot of your friendships and the things you feel like you have to do or the things you have to achieve, like they're all made up. I was reading this monk Kenko, Kenko. I'm really into reading wisdom from 800 or more years ago. Just you see how, because you see how little, talking about change, you see how little.
It's more Lindy.
Explain Lindy.
Lindy is, if it's been around for a few thousand years, it's more likely to be true than if it's been around for a few thousand minutes.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. First of all, 100%, I do think that's true. And also, you see how little we've changed. So he was a Japanese Buddhist monk from like the 1200s, but he was saying like, all those people who criticize you, they're all going to be dead. All those people who praise you, they're all going to be dead. Like your whole reputation, no one's going to fucking remember. So just go live your life, and that advice still holds today.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Now, I'd be interested in your thoughts on dating apps. We've seen this rise of dating apps. How do you think that's changing the dynamics of both dating and relationships?
Yeah, man. On the positive side, it is so easy to meet people now because you can just get on these apps and just start matching right away and meet people instantly. So I think that's great. There are a few downsides of it. One being, if you're actually looking for a relationship. and what I mean by that is, so when you're hiring someone, it's really hard to hire someone because the job pool has a lot of the same unemployable people circulating. They just can't get a job or they get fired really quickly and they're just circulating and circulating forever in the job pool. And you just have to get lucky and pluck one out who's kind of fresh to the job pool often to have a great employee. So the same thing is true of the dating apps, which are the same undateable people are circulating over and over again on the dating apps. And so I think it's challenging to find someone to have a meaningful connection with on the apps. So I think that's one issue, is you're really dealing with a lot of undateable people there. And two is everybody's replaceable. So there's a common thing on the apps where you meet someone, you start talking, it's very romantic, you start projecting into this could be it, this could be the one. You meet them, maybe even start dating a little bit, and then one thing goes wrong. They're not available a weekend when you want them to be available. You're like, all right, fuck it. And you're back in the dating pool trying to find that person again. So everybody's super expendable.
Because the friction is lower to meet people, therefore people are much less likely to commit.
Or much quicker to discard. Whereas before, you're out, you meet someone, you exchange phone numbers, and you're like, oh, this is really, I don't want to let this one slip away. And you're excited to call them the next day. Here you wake up and you have like 30 new matches. and they're all like, oh, that one's got this incredible job, and that one looks really cool, and that one, like, oh my God, what a funny, witty comment they had. They could be amazing. And so, boom, you're right back in it. So I think that by and large, it probably is great for meeting people, but bad for committed relationships.
Do you think it's like a good thing or a bad thing that it's so easy to sort people? One of my friends who worked for Hinge said after like the obvious ones, age, gender, location, like the number one thing people search for is political leaning. Like, do you think all of these like weird sorting things is going to have this odd effect on society?
Yeah, explain in other words that we're getting into these sort of relationships based on these funny criteria.
Yeah, exactly. Like, is political leaning or some of these other like odd sorting things that people are sorting for, is that really like the most important thing? Maybe people are already sorting for it in real life, but now it's like you don't even see people that don't fit your criteria.
Right, because maybe we're looking for other things beyond these criteria. So when it's political beliefs, we're still looking for a sort of affinity. A lot of times with height, really what people might be looking for is safety. I want a tall man who I feel safe around. So the answer is we're probably leaving a lot of incredible matches on the table by making these very shallow categories. And really, if I had an app, it would be like chemistry. We going back to the childhood stuff. If somebody tells me their parenting situation with their parents, I generally know what kind of relationship they're going to be in.
Really? You think so just from what they say with their parents?
Oh, totally. And if I know what kind of relationship they're in, I can generally tell what their parenting was like 100%. Because think about this, like you're receiving a certain kind of love growing up, and that becomes your template for what love is. Is love nurturing or abandoning or narcissistic or abusive? And you're equating these things with love, and your brain cells are being wired together around these early relational caretaking experiences. And our unconscious goes out and finds somebody who they have all the best and worst qualities of our parents.
Do you think these AIs and chatbots, in some ways, there are going to be more and more people who have relationships with them, kind of like the movie Her? How do you think that's going to affect things?
Yeah. I mean, I guess to the same extent that people have relationships with those real dolls, they'll have relationship with AIs in the same way that people write to prisoners in jail and marry people on death row. They'll marry AIs.
But I don't know anyone who writes to prisoners on death row. I don't know anyone that has like relationships with these dolls. I mean, they may, but they're at least not telling me about it. But I presume there's going to be a lot of people I know in the future that have like strong relationships with AIs.
Yeah. And I think the answer is it'll just be another option for the same, I don't want to say like illness because that's extreme. It'll just be another option for people of a certain personality type. So if you're a bit avoidant, like so going back to what we're saying, let's just say that you had a very unsafe childhood. So love and the vulnerability that love requires is very unsafe. So you might have a relationship with an AI because you get love and nurturing and connection and empathy and being seen how you want it, when you want it, with no challenges, maybe unless those challenges are programmed in to keep you hooked on the AI. So that's going to be a very safe way for some people to experience connection. And maybe that's not bad. Is it better to be really lonely and feel really unheard and feel really unseen, or feel like this AI is there for you and allows you to get on with your day because you're communicating with someone who feels like they're nurturing and empathic and there for you and connecting? And does it keep you from being in a relationship? Maybe it's keeping you from being in a toxic relationship. Who knows?
Now, when I was growing up, the crazy parents that were like super involved in like everything that the kid was doing and knew everything about their kids and everything like that were almost exclusively the immigrant parents. And today it seems like everybody is a crazy parent. Everyone's involved. Everyone is super spending all this time with, their kids and everything. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Let's see, if I'm understanding the question correctly, what you're saying is parents now are more conscious of being there for their children. They're over the top of it.
They're more conscious of being involved. Yeah, they're signing their kids up for gazillion extracurriculars. My parents didn't even know my teachers' names, I don't think. They're involved in everything. They understand. They're checking the homework. They're working with their kids. They're getting their kids tutors and things and other stuff. They're spending a lot more time with their kids today than parents of generation ago were doing. And so the amount of time that both dads and moms spend with their kids today is drastically higher than it was in the past, especially in a certain income range and educational level. Is that something like we should be concerned about, or is that actually not a good thing?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of healthy things to it, and there are a few unhealthy things. But the healthy things are obviously the more connection a child can have with their parents and the more they're seen, connected with, present with their parents. I think it's great. I also think it feels like in the past few years, we've become a lot more aware as a culture or society of trauma and how that works outside of big traumatic events. We realize all the little things that cause trauma. So I think the answer is parents spending more time and being more involved in their children's lives is by and large good. At the same time, it depends on whether they're there for their child's needs or they're making their child be there for their needs. The difference being, I want you to succeed and get into a good college because that's important to me, versus being attuned to what the child wants to do. So the downside of it is overwhelming your child's life. Being present is not going to overwhelm your child's needs, child's life, but making a full schedule for your child that has nothing to do with what the child wants is going to overwhelm them. Or being, I guess all the different helicopter parents or snowplow parents is going to overwhelm them. Making it about you, making your child your identity and your source of self-worth is not going to be healthy for the child. It's going to be the opposite problem of abandonment, which is enmeshment or engulfment.
I do think these parents are sacrificing their own social life, and they're often giving up a social life to do more stuff for their kids. In some ways that could be good. In some ways that maybe isn't so good. You have the scenario today where maybe the only thing you're allowed to brag about anymore is your kids. And so like, let's say, Neil, let's say you win the Nobel Peace Prize or something, but like my kid goes to Harvard, like I kind of trump you at the cocktail party. In fact, if you meet someone who won the Nobel Peace Prize, you might not know about it for a very long time. Whereas if you meet someone whose kid goes to Harvard, you'll certainly know about it in the first 1 minute.
Oh, totally. My last book that hit the bestseller list, I didn't even mention it on Twitter. Like I didn't even mention it, but my kid hits it. I will definitely mention it. I think that's a good point. And I guess like it's a sweet thing that we want to brag about our kids and our kids doing well and those little things. Like I think that's nice as long as we don't, again, derive identity for it and accept them no matter what they achieve and don't achieve. But for sure, trying to have our kids achieve so that we have certain status is pretty toxic.
All right, I've got two more questions for you. The first of the two is, what is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
I guess if you believe it, it's not a conspiracy theory, right?
Well, at least other people might deem it as a conspiracy theory.
I don't believe people keep secrets well. As someone who's interviewed some of the most famous people in the world, like, I really don't believe people keep secrets well. So I don't believe a lot of group conspiracy theories. And I also don't think people get along well enough once they have a lot of power. I mean, I'm reading speaking of old books, I'm also reading, what's his name? He wrote a history of the Roman emperors, begins with an S. Anyway, I can't remember his name. It was written at the time, like it's a writer from 1,000 years old. I'm really kind of enjoying this. So, it's going to drive me nuts. I can remember it as soon as it's over. Anyway, it's like literally the father's killing his brother and the sons killing their father. Like, people, when it comes to power, especially, there's so much infighting and backstabbing. It makes me hard to believe that if this cabal that's running the world has somehow gotten to a place where they're actually not fighting amongst themselves over power, then maybe I don't know.
It's almost against human instinct.
They've transcended something.
Okay, this is great. Last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Oh, just be yourself.
Just be yourself. Okay.
And here's why. We don't know who the fuck we are. We don't know who we are. Let's just be myself. Like, if I'm pissed off, like if I want to take the money out of the cash register, like, we literally don't know who we are. Like, no one knows. We don't know who we are. So, and what side of myself do you want me to be? It's such useless advice, and people are struggling to be better people. So it could be just be your best self. And I also think authenticity, be your authentic self. What side of you is authentic? What side is not authentic? I think you'll relate to that judging by your questions. So I think maybe a better way to think about it, but it is true. Like, just be yourself is like really annoying advice. It's like, I'm trying to be a better person, man. Can I be a better person? Or am I just this horrible person I am right now?
It's like, hey, just relax. Like, just be yourself. Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine, kind of thing.
And when has just relax ever made anybody relax in the history of the universe, right? Like, if someone says just relax, like, you really are like saying, I don't feel heard. That's what goes out of your body. Like, I don't feel heard. I think I have a reason to have a little tension right now. And I think maybe a better way to think about it is like the creative self and the destructive self, because we can quantify that. Am I creating things in my life, whether it's relationships or positive things or businesses or healthy children, or my destructive self, which is destroying relationships, destroying opportunities, destroying myself, destroying my health. So I think about it in terms of creative and destructive, like that universal principle of creation and destruction, versus just being yourself or your authentic self. I think that's healthier kind of measuring stick.
I love it. That's great. Thank you, Neil Strauss, for joining us at World of DaaS. I follow you at Neil Strauss on Twitter. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks, Auren. It was super fun, man. Next time I'm going to draw you out more.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this show, consider rating this podcast and leaving a review. For more World of DaaS, and DaaS is DAAS, you can subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. And also check out YouTube for videos. You can find me at Twitter at Auren, that's AUREN, Auren, and we'd love to hear from you. World of DaaS is brought to you by SafeGraph. SafeGraph is geospatial data for physical places. Check it out at safegraph.com. And by Flex Capital. Flex Capital invests in data companies like those we talk about at World of DaaS. Check it out at flexcapital.com.